Hi everyone, it's Noah and welcome to this week's new video. Today I am very excited about this video because there's a hair. If you know anything about me, you know that I love to read. If you've watched like my what's in my purse videos, you'll know that I never go anywhere without a book. And so I thought it would be cool to do a like what I've been reading so far, or what I've been reading lately. I thought about doing a what I've been reading this month, but I realized that I couldn't remember what I read in the beginning of September. So I'm just gonna go with talking about the books that I've borrowed at the library. You get to borrow books for 3 weeks, so I've also have these ones, but we'll get to that later. So I'll just go in the order that I have read them. So the very first book that I read was this book called The Gilded Years by Karin Tanabe. This book is very interesting. It's a book about this woman named Anita Hemmings who had a childhood dream of going to Vassar College, and she made it. The only thing is that she is passing for white. This like takes place in the late 1800s, so like the 90s, the 1890s, and she's passing for white. So basically she has like black ancestry, which was looked down on. Slavery is like not really a thing anymore, but the South was a place where people escaped and it was still dangerous. And she is passing for white, so she's pretending to be completely of white ancestry at Vassar, and then she ends up becoming roommates with like this woman Louise Taylor, who's one of New York's like most prominent families. She's super rich and super just like basically like royalty, and they become friends, and it's kind of her like keeping her secret and dealing with that. And there's a bit of love in here, of course, some betrayal, and some like, I'm just like so anxious this entire book because I haven't read many books on passing. I've actually only read one before this one, and it was for school. So like the whole idea of passing is very scary because you're kind of just outcasted if you're black automatically, and so you kind of just fear for her. You feel for her so much because she's so gifted and talented, and she's getting her education from a school that she always dreamed of going to, and just you really want everything for Anita. And it's actually historical fiction. It's actually based on a true story, on a real person, I should say. And I really love this. It's so easy to read. I definitely got through this book very quickly, so please give it a read. And then I read The Dollhouse, which is by Fiona Davis. I think this is her first written book ever. It was really cool, a little confusing at first. It jumps back from the present to the 1950s. But everything connects, I promise. It's about this woman named Darby McLaughlin. It's hard to explain because it jumps back from the past to the present. But it's about this woman named, in the 1950s, Darby McLaughlin moves to the city to go to secretary school at the Barbizon Hotel. And this also takes place in New York. And she makes friends in this cool jazz culture with the maid at the Barbizon, who is a Puerto Rican woman named Esme. There's like this tragic thing that happens in the 50s between Esme and Darby, and then fast forward to the present. Darby still lives at the Barbizon Hotel. It became a rent-controlled apartment for the women who lived there while it was still the Barbizon, but it became like a whole new apartment building. And this journalist, Rose Lewin, moves in and hears about her story, and she's like investigating that, trying to get a story out of it. It jumps back between the past and the present, so you kind of have to keep up with the characters and their names and what's going on. But when it's all starting to come together, it gets really exciting because you're starting to see like what happened in the past that ultimately led to how it was, if that makes sense, in the present. So this was also a really quick read. It's really interesting. A lot of suspense in this one too. I keep saying that these are all really quick reads, but I just love to read. I read all the time, so maybe that's why I think that it is, but this definitely was. Please look at the text. fast. It's obviously very quick to read. It's called Another Brooklyn by Jacqueline Woodson. I was excited to read this one because I remember reading a book by Jacqueline Woodson as a elementary student, I think, elementary school student. This book was a little confusing. It's kind of like written in a poem. To me it was, because everything kind of jumped around and chapters ended very abruptly that you kind of had to stop and think about what happened and what was going to happen next. So it's mainly about this young girl named August and her just childhood in 1970s Brooklyn, and she befriends these three girls, and it's partly about their childhood as well, but it's about how like she's growing up in Brooklyn from this young age, like elementary school or middle school, into an adult. And it's just kind of like growing up and what you experience in life in like the path that you're led to into adulthood. So there's a lot of like loss of innocence, a lot of new things to learn, the comings and goings of friends and things like that. So it's very poem-esque, if I'm even allowed to say that. But I did like it. There's this whole recurring theme about the mother, which I found was really interesting in this one. And it's kind of like, it's not completely sad, but it's what I felt during and like after. I just felt sorrow and like, wow, because at times you can understand like maybe the loss of innocence and how it's just very relatable, because at my age in college I'm still like leading up to the path of adulthood because I'm still a student, but it's a lot of relatable things, so I think this is worth a read. This book here I borrowed, but I didn't enjoy it, so I'm not going to talk about it. But currently I'm reading Grace by Natasha Down. This is a book partly about slavery. It's the 1840s. It's about a couple of generations. It's about first a slave girl, really. She's like 15, young woman, named Naomi. She's able to escape slavery, and she ends up in Georgia and taken in by a woman named Cynthia in a brothel. And then the next generation would be her daughter, Josephine. The chapters, they don't overlap. The chapters are all very different. It's either about Naomi's life or Josie's life. But the important thing to learn is that you learn very early on in the beginning that Naomi is dead. The first line literally is, "I am dead." And she kind of looks, she never got to meet her daughter, so she looks over her life. So that's like her narrating it, Josephine's life. It gets a little bit confusing because this is also a bit of the past and the present, but each chapter does let you know like what the time period is and where it's taking place. So I'm still a little over halfway through. I've got a little bit left to read, but I really like this book so far. It's not too much involved in slavery, but it is a little very like race-centric. Oh god. But I mean, it's the 1840s, and the Civil War is also taking place in this book, so there's a lot of like race issues about whether Lincoln is patriotic, President Lincoln is patriotic, and like the slaves aren't told that the Emancipation Proclamation like isn't the law in the South because they're Confederates. So there's a whole talk about that and the slaves not knowing who to believe, so they're still seen as like property. This book is, of course, it's like very sad. There's a little bit of love in this and a little bit of like the mother wanting to save her daughter, but so far I really like this book. It is sad, but I mean, what can you expect with a plot like this? And you really just feel for Naomi when she's watching Josie, because she wants so badly to help her, but all she could do is just be like the guardian angel who watches from afar. Now I have 2 other books that are left. I borrowed this separately. It's actually going to be a Netflix original, so this is the book called Underground Airlines. I obviously haven't read it yet, but I found this plot to be really interesting because it's like taking place in the present, except that the Civil War never took place. So I thought that was a really interesting take on the world, what it would look like. I know that the creators of Game of Thrones are creating a show like that, and which is very controversial. It's kicking up a lot of dirt in people's faces. But it's about a black man named Victor who is acting as a bounty hunter for the US Marshals Service. And in this America, because Civil War never occurred, slavery continues in 4 states known as the Hard Four. Victor used to be a slave, so he worked on plantations as a child. He's working to infiltrate the local cell of an abolitionist movement called the Underground Airlines. So I guess it's about that. He's like undercover. So that's what this book is about. That's why I picked it out. I thought it was interesting because you always think about like the alternate world, or like the alternative version of your life and how it would have turned out if you took this path instead of this one, you know? So I thought that was really interesting. I still have to get around to it. I actually have to renew these 2 books in order to be able to finish them because they are due tomorrow. So, and then this one I borrowed separately because it came later. It's Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, the author of Handmaid's Tale, if you didn't know. I really enjoyed Handmaid's Tale. The show, I read the book for school. Oh my god, that's who my sophomore English teacher was. I was trying to think about it yesterday in class and I couldn't think of it. I read that sophomore year. And I believe this is also based on a real story of a woman in Canada, I think. And I read like the first couple of pages at first. And she's like accused of the murder of her boss. She worked as like the maid or something at the house of Thomas Kinnear. And she's accused of his murder as well as the housekeeper, who I believe was his lover, Nancy Montgomery. And so it's kind of about that. It's a bit of a mystery because she's serving a life sentence. She was convicted, and the man who was thought to be her accomplice was killed, I believe. He was hung. So murder by state. And there's this doctor who works in the field of mental illness, and he's seeing if Grace deserves a pardon. And so we kind of hear about whether or not she is the murderer or not, and whether or not she can remember what actually happened that day. I actually want to give a shout out to this magazine article that I found all of these books from. But I just realized I wanted to rip this out and read the books and paste it into my journal, but I can no longer remember what magazine it came from, which is very problematic because I wanted to give them a shout out. But it comes from here. This magazine, the editors, I guess, or someone picked 18 novels, biographies, memoirs spanning 240 years of history. And so it starts out from the 1770s all the way into the present, or the future actually. And I picked a bunch, like Grace is from here, The Gilded Years, the 1890s. Oh my god, Leaving Lucy Pear, 1920s. That's the book that I returned, and I realized I read that and I wanted to talk about that too. I returned it though, but I don't have the actual book with me, but that was in this pile. And Leaving Lucy Pear is about, also a little generational. It's about this girl, oh my god, I can't remember names, named Lucy Pear, who was left under a pear tree after, like, she's basically like the bastard child because her parents aren't married. She's actually the product of rape. And she's left under this tree, and the mother, she's very rich too, and she is hoping that someone will take the baby. And she's watching from afar, and eventually she gets taken by a different family, very, I think Irish immigrants, large family. And she gets taken into the care of a woman named Emma. Ooh, I remember her name, Emma. And then the rich woman, god, what's her name? Ugh. And Emma, their lives become intertwined, and then Lucy Pear, the child, becomes aware of her history, and it's kind of about that. And not too focused on her life until the end. You'll understand why the title is called that. But it's really sad too. It wasn't my favorite book, but it was interesting. So if my plot, if that made any sense to you, God, I wish. I sound like really bad because I don't know what it's about. But anyway, this article is how I found all of them. That's why the majority of them are written in 2016, I think, because they're all very recent, even though the histories are all different. And I just picked out whatever books I found on the plot. They have like a little plot here written for them, so I picked out whatever books sounded interesting to me and then borrowed them. They were all really good so far. I think I borrowed 8 of them, and 2 of them I haven't read. Only didn't like 1 of them, so I think that did pretty well. I really like them. I'll have them all linked in the description bar below so you can know what title they are. And I'll probably, like, instead of linking them to like Amazon or whatever, because there's definitely a free way to read them, like going to the library. Going to the library is totally free. And I will maybe link like a Wikipedia page or like the author's page, just so you can get a better feel for what the book is about. I hope you guys enjoyed. I think this type of video is really fun for me because I get to showcase to you guys what I love to read. And if you guys read them, of course, please let me know. I want to know what your thoughts were on them so we can have a discussion about them. And let me know if you have any book suggestions, because I am always looking for new books to read. I hope you guys enjoy. Please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. I mean the bare necessities are Mother Nature's recipes that bring the bare necessities of life.